Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone was having so much fun chatting. I thought I would give you a few extra minutes. So welcome to the awards presentation and Trask Lecture. I'm Felicia Wivchar. I'm the awards coordinator. So having the opportunity to recognize and celebrate the exemplary work of our colleagues is one of my favorite things about SHFG. Over the past few years, we've been working on fine-tuning the awards to better recognize the scope and breadth of federal public history work. The awards presented today are given for the traditional finite projects like published books and articles, but also for works in progress, for years-long commitments, for group efforts, and decades of contributions to the field are all recognized. So today, we'll share the commendations for the 2023 awardees for two of our long-term achievement awards, the Mary Ellen Troutman Award for Outstanding Service to the Society, and the Roger Trask Award, which honors historians whose work reflects the unique importance of federal history and the mission of the Society. We will also present the SHFG Member Award, Historic Preservation and Exhibitions Award, the Prize for Article or Essay, the Excellence in New Media Award, and the Book Award. In addition, we are excited to share our very first SHFG Award for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'd also like to point out that the folks presenting the awards today are mostly among the members of the individual awards committees who volunteer their time to review and deliberate the nominations in each category. So a huge thank you to all of the people who have served on the awards committee. Their volunteer time makes this all possible. So we will go ahead and just get this show on the road, and so I'd like to ask Mike Reese to come up to present the Mary Ellen Troutman Award.
Thank you, Felicia. Well, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the SHFG's 2023 Mary Ellen Troutman Awardee, my good friend, colleague, and partner in federal history outreach, Judson McClary. Judson retired in 2011 as chief historian of the U.S. Department of Labor. In the 1980s and 90s, he served 2 stints as innovative chief editor of our own Federalist newsletter. And for a decade, he's been the able associate editor of the Federal History Journal. But Judson also cares deeply about a key, original, and long-time goal of our federal history community, namely building up greater public awareness and understanding of federal government history. Judson has tirelessly worked to put that passion into practice. In 2017, he implemented and then curated the web portal to over 150 federal history pages known as History at FedGov, still a key training and educational resource of the Society. And his aim with History at FedGov was no less than to offer, quote, links to every known history page created by an agency of the federal government, from cabinet departments to the smallest independent commission. And then he doubled down on public outreach. He created in 2018 with SHFG colleagues the Public Education Project, or PEP, incubated very well as a standing committee with the Society, and then just last year launched as an independent NPO. PEP ambitiously seeks to directly broaden citizen knowledge and understanding of the history of the federal government. Under Judson's aegis, PEP to date has produced 3 pilot videos, launched a website featuring an A to Z federal history database, and is just now poised to debut on July 4th a YouTube channel which will host a whole new and exciting series of 3 to 5 minute videos on vivid episodes and personalities from particular federal agencies and offices. Let me just say that as I have found personally, Judson's vision is powerful and compelling. But he may have telegraphed his punch as early as 1989, when he came back for his second tour as editor of the Federalist and immediately changed the old nondescript title of Professional Notes to Dynamic Making History. Judson, in fact, has always held high the banner that federal history his history worth making, sharing, and proclaiming, and I am so proud to congratulate him on receiving this year's Mary Ellen Troutman Award for distinguished service to the Society for History in the federal government. Congratulations, Judson.
Well, thank you so much. This was such a huge surprise. So I'm really pleased and honored to accept this entirely unexpected award. I was such a surprise when I learned of it from my good friend, Elizabeth Charles. So I'm really appreciative of recognition by the leadership of my efforts to contribute to the society, and also to, as Mike alluded to realize the ideals of the society. We're reaching out to the American public about the history of this, what I call the mosaic, the grand mosaic of the federal government to the public. I'm really proud and honored to join the company of past recipients, like going way back to like David Trask, some of you may remember, Sharon Gibbs Thibodeau, Ben Guterman, whom I work with on federal history, and of course Mary Ellen Troutman herself, who I think she was the first and I think the only executive secretary the society ever had. I could be wrong on that, but as far as I know. So some may remember in 2003 when the Executive Council decided to rename what was then called the President's Award as the Mary Ellen Troutman Award. And so I think the award really honors not only its recipients, but Mary Ellen Troutman herself. I'm sorry that I don't see her in the audience, but I'm sorry she's not here, but she's been a treasure for the society for many, many years. So I'm especially honored to receive something named after her. So on the 20th year since the renaming, I'm pleased to accept the award, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you, everybody.
And next, I'd like to invite up Mandy Shalhoub to hand out our brand new award for initiatives in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility.
Thank you so much, Felicia. I am so excited to be the first person to be able to hand out this award. The Society is pleased to award its inaugural DEIA Award to the Smithsonian Institution DEAI Group for developing guidelines to make all presentations accessible. The SIDEAI Group is a pan-institution group of staff from across the Smithsonian and focuses on fostering an inclusive environment that seeks to eliminate barriers to participation. The SIDEAI presenter guidelines consist of presenter recommendations for making all meetings accessible, a list of accessibility resources, and a series of best practices for visual presentations. The Society believes that for this inaugural award, the SIDEAI Group and their accessibility guidelines are a shining example of the work all federal institutions should be doing to make their workplaces fully inclusive and accessible. And I'd like to invite Keats Webb up to accept the award.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure and an honor to be receiving this inaugural award as a representative of the SI-DEAI group. Our group is a pan-institutional group open to all staff and affiliated staff persons with over 300 people on our Microsoft Teams channel and mailing list. We are all kinds of people from all across the Smithsonian, and we all share a commitment to make the institution and the world a more equitable and kinder place. Our strength is in our relationships, and we've been exploring exactly what that means for how we handle meetings, decision-making, giving and receiving resources and perspectives. The group is co-convened by a rotating group of members. I am one of the co-conveners of this group, along with Kara Lewis, Angela Smithers, Kaylin Meyer, Daria Wingreen, and Catherine Ott. The greater Smithsonian community values DEAI and expresses these values in a variety of ways. Throughout the institution, both formal and grassroots efforts have given rise to affinity groups and employee resource groups, creation of unit-level DEAI groups, access coordinators at several units, and digital forums. Our current group started as 2 separate groups on diversity and inclusion and accessibility in collections that were initiated with the Smithsonian's National Collections Program's Collections Collaboration Community, so that's NCP-C3, conference in 2019. We love our acronyms. NCP encourages these conference topic groups to extend for a year beyond the original day or 2 of the conference. After our initial year commitment, both groups found it essential to continue the work, and the 2 groups merged out of the recognition of the intersectional nature of DEAI work. So we meet monthly, we host watch parties, and we have a Teams channel to share resources. Our group prioritizes an inclusive environment for all by anticipating and eliminating barriers to participation. We have worked to ensure that real-time captioning is available for our meetings. We have had programming that focused on digital accessibility for both our monthly meetings and watch parties to increase the group's awareness and plant the seed for our members to continue to learn and advocate around digital accessibility. To further and continue this, we created an accessibility and inclusion guidelines document that we share with presenters coming to our group to encourage increasing the accessibility and inclusion of presentations. Education and awareness are at the heart of what we do. We are all coming to this work at different levels of experience and expertise, so it is important to meet each other where we are and encourage collective learning. Our monthly meetings include short presentations from colleagues across the Smithsonian who are doing DEAI work. These presentations provide introductions or overviews to this work and these initiatives. Longer presentations dive into priority topics and provide more in-depth discussion about these topics. We also host watch parties, which offer another way to engage and learn about DEAI topics by watching recorded material and providing space to encourage group discussion and learning. We are committed to creating community, which is essential to this work. Coming together for our monthly meetings and learning about work throughout the institution help to build community, but we also intentionally start our monthly meetings with breakout rooms of small groups to allow members to connect with each other, whether it's meeting for the first time or reconnecting. Members are able to connect with colleagues on DEAI topics, sharing challenges and bringing up issues. Building trust and building community are essential to this work, and it is important to approach this intentionally. Borrowing some words from Catherine, one of our co-conveners opening a recent meeting, we respect the silences, we make room for error, and we use kindness to tell someone to think again about something. It's fine to just listen. There's no expected way to participate. This work is messy and sometimes painful and scary, but most importantly, it's a process and it's never done. We are here for each other because we need each other. Thank you.
So next we have our SHFG Member Award, and Fred Augustin will be joining us to present that. Thank you, Fred.
Okay, the award, the Member Award Committee consisting of Tracy Betts, Christine Lamberson, and myself, Fred Augustine, wishes to share its collective comments, which we sent to the winner who could not be here. In 50 years of protecting communities and safeguarding the nation, a history of the Los Angeles District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 1966 to 2016, Paul Sadin and co-authors tell a nuanced history. The book highlights the diverse and changing work of the unit over a 50-year period. It provides both a thorough history of work and an analysis of key themes and trends in the Corps during this period, making it a particularly excellent example of federal government history. Further, it highlights both highs and lows of the agency's history. The clear, accessible writing, along with thorough research, including several original oral histories and numerous illustrative images, make this work appealing both to a general and to a scholarly audience. Now, Paul is all the way in Seattle, the other Washington, okay? And so he could not make it here. But he sent me a statement. She sent the group a statement, and I will read it here if I may. I am sorry that I could not be there to thank the selection committee personally for the award and for giving the book their full attention, as is reflected in the award comments. The book is a great example of how it's possible to produce a complex, useful organizational history of a federal agency when experienced historical consultants, and here I thank my colleagues at Historical Research Associates, are able to work closely with local agency staff. The many folks we interviewed or assisted us at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Los Angeles District and collaborate with superb federal historians. Among those historians are Bianca Adams and her colleagues in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Office of History in Alexandria, Virginia. Thanks to all of them as well. Best regards, Paul Sadin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Next, Leslie Poster will be presenting our prize for historic preservation or exhibition.
Thank you, Felicia, and good afternoon, everyone. The 2023 Prize for Historic Preservation and Exhibits is awarded to the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command History Office. INSCOM utilizes workspaces at their command headquarters, the Major General Dennis Nolan Building, to interpret and display the command's history. With almost 250 distinct displays, parts of the INSCOM's material culture can now be found in almost every corner and hallway in the NON's command areas. The committee appreciates the innovative approach to presenting interconnected exhibits throughout the workspaces and sees this work as a practical and effective model for other offices. These exhibits collectively tell the command's story and capture its heritage through visual images, artwork, and other artifacts. The exhibits in the Nolan Building tell the multifaceted history of INSCOM, from telling the story of the building's namesake, Major General Dennis Nolan, to a 250-square-foot history center that features artifacts from the History Office's collection, including the American Sagaba and German Enigma code machines from World War II. Two exhibits in the building's long hallways present a chronological history of the command from 1977 onwards and a history of the command's involvement in the Vietnam War. It's my pleasure to invite Mike Bigelow to the stage to accept this honor, and our congratulations to the U.S. Army INSCOM History Office.
You know, when I initially thought that I would come up here, I thought I was just going to come back and sit back down, but I decided to say something because I didn't want to feel left out, and everybody else had said something. So just a few notes. First of all, I really appreciate this award, and it's an honor to me to accept it on behalf of my organization. It really was a big part of the effort was rethinking how you display your artifacts. We all like to display artifacts in big museum kind of like buildings, and most of us don't have that. So it took a little while and a little creative thought to do that. and think about, hey, I got a corner here, what can I put in this corner? I got a long hallway there, what can I put there? But the biggest lesson I got out of this project was the story of stone soup. You know the story. A group of travelers come in to a village. The village, they want to have some food. The village says, we don't have any food. They hide everything away. And they say, well, what we'll do is we'll make stone soup. So they say, get a big pot, get 3 large stones, and we'll make stone soup. And they're going, wow, okay. And then somebody says, one of the travelers say, hey, why don't we get some carrots? Oh, I think I have some carrots. We could spare carrots in there. You know what else would be good? Maybe having some cabbage. Oh, so they get some cabbage and put the cabbage in. And after a while, all of them come out and they have a great stew made up of something that really was started as nothing. And that's kind of what this was. You know, I started off saying, hey, I want a place where I can put my 9 big artifacts out. Well, wait, I have a long hallway? I can use that long hallway to do this. Oh, I got another long hallway? I can do that with this long hallway. Oh, I got a corner here? I can work that. And that's what ended up happening, where it really became part of an interconnected display system. So what I'm hoping is when somebody sits down in one of my conference rooms that's named after one of our past locations, they start getting an idea of, hey, this was kind of interesting. I wonder what else I can learn. Oh, let me go down the hallway and see. Or if they go down the hallway and they try to figure out, well, what do these mean? What are these symbols? And so forth. So that's what I was trying to get at, and I think we succeeded in doing that. And again, the big takeaway is, for you little offices, think stone soup. Think, hey, put my foot in the door, then I can start building off of that. Thank you very much.
And next up is our prize for article or essay. Julie Prieto will be presenting that.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of SHFG's Article Awards Committee, which is myself, Matthew Reagan, and Kate Halgren, it's our great pleasure to award this year's prize to Dr. Joel Herbert for his pamphlet, Our Greatest Strength, Navy Wives and the Manpower Crisis of the 1970s Navy, published by the Naval History and Heritage Command. This innovative work provides a window onto an important and understudied area of U.S. naval history. It tells the story of how the U.S. Navy came to place women and families at the center of retention policies in the 1970s, while addressing how issues of race and gender impacted the force and the development of these policies. It relies on personal stories from a range of people, including women who were married to enlisted men still at the beginning of their careers at the time, through the senior leadership, including the Chief of Naval Operations. In doing so, it creates a fascinating and layered picture of the Navy at a moment of transition. The work also utilizes a range of records that until now have been greatly underutilized. Dr. Herbert is currently an assistant professor and director of the Clark Special Collections at McDermott Library, United States Air Force Academy, which is in Colorado, which is why he's not here in person to accept his award. Before that, he was a historian at the Naval History and Heritage Command, and before that, he was a graduate research assistant at the U.S. Army Center of Military History, where I had the pleasure of getting to know him. Dr. Herbert will not be here, but join me in congratulating him on his achievement. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And now I'd like to invite Tom Faith up to present the Excellence in New Media Award.
Hello, everyone. SHFG's Excellence in New Media Award recognizes annually a digitally born or based historical project that contributes to a broader understanding of the federal government created by an agency or unit of the federal government. The SHFG New Media Award Committee is pleased to announce that the Arlington National Cemetery History Office's Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Centennial Program, Tomb 100, is our award recipient this year. ANC led the Department of Defense's year-long commemoration of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Centennial, which included the creation of 6 webinars and 5 video events, 2 virtual exhibit tours, a downloadable media resource guide, dozens of social media posts, 11 blog articles, a live stream flower ceremony with a historian speaker, 3 web pages, and a live stream military procession and aerial review narrated by a historian, and 3 web pages produced by the ANC, the U.S. Army, and DoD. Tomb 100 reflects the ANC's History Office's commitment to exploring broad historical questions and encouraging the audience to do the same through virtual and hybrid media formats. The breadth, complexity, and quality of these materials speaks to the ANC's History Office's mastery of a wide variety of electronic media, its scholarly expertise, and its staff's sensitivity to the profound and nuanced meanings of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Congratulations.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Allison Finkelstein. This is my colleague Tim Frank and Jennifer Van Vleck. So I'm going to say a few things and then pass it over to Tim. We're just really honored to receive this prize. Thank you all so much. When we started planning the Tomb Centennial, we did not think we would be doing any virtual programs, but of course, like many of you, innovation was forced upon us by the pandemic, and we ended up having to learn how to do not just digital programs, but hybrid and in-person programs. And it was quite a challenge, and we had to rely a lot on our federal and non-federal partners to make that happen. Those webinars that you heard about, none of them were hosted by ANC because DoD won't let us do that. So we had to rely upon all of you and many member offices, representatives of whom have been here over the conference really made this happen. So thank you all. It just shows the partnerships that can be created out of SHFG. We also want to provide some recognition to our teammates who couldn't be here today. Dr. Stephen Carney, our command historian, Rod Gaynor, our curator, members of our public affairs office, our engineering teams, cultural resources, horticulture, facilities management, pretty much everybody at the cemetery participated in the Tomb Centennial and helped us figure out how to make these programs go on. So thank you, and I'll let Tim take it from here.
I just quickly want to say what an honor it is to be recognized by our colleagues in the federal government, and to echo what Allison said. We really owe a lot to our federal and non-federal partners. Especially, I wanted to just shout out to the National Archives. I've been saying for the last 25 years that the archivists are our national treasures. And because we were able to scan thousands of records before the pandemic, not knowing obviously that there would be a pandemic, we were able to pull off this 100-year centennial. So thank you again for this award. It really means a lot to our team.
Just one more.
And I'll be very brief because I would basically echo everything that Allison and Tim have said. It's a tremendous honor to receive this award, and I'd like to underscore the amount of collaboration and institutional partnerships that went into this year-plus-long project, as well as the internal partnerships at ANC. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge the Public Affairs Office with which I work, as well as the History Office, and my fellow contractor, Kevin Hemel. So also, if you are interested in seeing any of the materials that were described, go to arlingtoncemetery.mil/tomb100. Everything is still there. So thank you very much.
And up next, we have our book award, which Kristen Alberg will be sharing. Come on up, Kristen.
Thank you, Felicia. The SHFG Book Prize Committee, which consists of Zach Wilski, Shannon Granville, and myself, is pleased to announce that the winner of this year's book award is Seth C. Brueggemann, who is the author of Lost on the Freedom Trail, the National Park Service and Urban Renewal in Post-War Boston, published by the University of Massachusetts Press in 2022. Using a wide array of primary sources, Dr. Brueggemann of Temple University details the multi-decade attempt to reimagine the Revolutionary War landscape within the city of Boston. Such a reimagining emphasized one dominant narrative above all others and later impacted the development of the Boston National Historic Park. Lost on the Freedom Trail is a significant contribution to the literature on historic preservation. It also illustrates the connections among federal, state, and local shareholders, demonstrating the tensions inherent in these relationships. And unfortunately, Dr. Brueggemann could not be here today, but he does wish to communicate that he is very humbled and honored by receiving this award, and if you could please join in congratulating him.
And last but of course not least, I would like to call up Joel Christensen to share the introduction for our Trask winner this year.
Before I get to the Trask Award, I would very much like to thank Felicia Wivchar for serving for several years as the Society's awards coordinator. She has done that work with tirelessness and excellence, but no rest for the weary. She's SHFG's brand new vice president. So thank you, Felicia, and also thank you to all the members of the awards committees. Every one of these awards is decided by a committee of volunteers, just like everyone in the Society is a volunteer. A very deep and heartfelt thank you to all awards committee members. And the Society is now pleased to honor Dr. William Barry as the 2023 Roger R. Trask Awardee in recognition of his innumerable contributions to federal history as NASA's chief historian. As detailed in the award nomination the Society received, Dr. Barry brought NASA's history program fully into the 21st century and exhibited an open and inviting leadership style as NASA's chief historian. His innovative efforts to forge creative partnerships within NASA and with international and private entities to broadly share the remarkable saga of space exploration provide an excellent example of a successful federal history program. Vibrant federal history programs are essential if agencies are to fully understand where they've been and to facilitate the application of the lessons of the past to future operations. With this year's Trask Award, the Society honors Dr. Barry's demonstrated commitment to these principles and his service to the federal history community. Dr. Barry retired as NASA's 6th chief historian in July of 2020 and is now an independent historian and glider flight instructor, which is pretty cool. He is continuing his research and writing on space history with particular interest in the U.S.-Soviet space cooperation and competition. Bill served in the U.S. Air Force for 22 years, largely alternating between pilot duties in the KC-135 air refueling tanker and teaching on the faculty of the U.S. Air Force Academy. His final Air Force assignment was to the Headquarters Policy and Plans Directorate of U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, Germany, where he was involved in work preparing Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania for NATO membership. He retired from the Air Force in 2001. His second career in government began with getting what I believe he calls a dream job at NASA's International Relations Office in Washington, D.C. As Senior International Program Specialist, he served as head of the Russia team, coordinating policy and plans across the spectrum of U.S.-Russia space cooperation. In 2007, he was selected to serve as the NASA European representative at the U.S. Embassy in Paris, hardship duty, might call that. In this post, he was responsible for representing and advancing NASA and the U.S. government's civil space interests throughout Europe. Upon returning to NASA headquarters in 2010, he was appointed chief historian, overseeing the history and archival programs at NASA. Over the next decade, he led a number of significant historical projects, including the marking of the centennial of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which is NASA's predecessor organization, and the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing. In addition, he served as a historical consultant on several major films, including Hidden Figures and the 2019 IMAX documentary Apollo 11. A graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, Dr. Berry also holds master's degree from Stanford University and a doctorate from Oxford. His doctoral dissertation, The Missile Bureau and Soviet Manned Space Policy, 1953 to 1970, won the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics History Manuscript Award in 2000. And it is our pleasure, and indeed our honor, to present him with this year's Roger Trask Award. Dr. Berry. And I will, just by way of preview, Dr. Berry will give the Trask Lecture. His title is Do Not Be Afraid, Leading History Programs in Challenging Times. Thank you, Dr. Berry.
Thanks, Joel. Oh, I thought I almost was going to get away without actually having to make a speech there, but now that you've introduced me, so thanks, Joel. So it was a Monday morning this March when an email from Joel actually landed in my inbox with the subject line, SHFG 2023 Roger R. Trask Award. And I remember thinking to myself that it seemed a bit earlier than usual to be announcing who the Trask Award winner would be. And so it was really quite a surprise to open the email and discover that they're inviting me to come give the Trask Award lecture this year. After all, I'd been to most of the 14 or so Trask lectures so far, and the honorees were all people with lengthy careers as historians. As you've heard from my introduction, my career as a federal historian was relatively short. And also most of them worked closely with Roger Trask, including in the founding and development of this very society. Frankly, I felt that I'd be a bit of an interloper in such august company. After all, as you heard, I had just started my first federal career as a pilot in the Air Force when the society was founded. And I really had very little to do with SHFG until I became the chief historian at NASA in 2010. Although, I will note that I attended my first annual meeting 26 years ago in April 1997. And that led to my one relatively brief and very pleasant encounter with Roger Trask. This all happened at the urging of my friend and predecessor at NASA and also the first Trask lecturer, Roger Lanius. Roger had encouraged me to present a paper about the start of the space race that was based on my doctoral dissertation that had been recently completed. Roger Trask wanted to include that paper as in the first of the Society's Occasional Papers series, which lasted for several episodes, I think. And that's the project that he served as editor on. I really don't remember a lot about working with Roger Trask, other than the impression of someone with boundless energy and enthusiasm, and thankfully for me anyway, a relatively gentle editorial hand. And I'm really sorry that by the time I had a compelling reason to come back and get involved more in the society, Roger had already passed on. But when I returned to Washington, D.C. in 2010 and stepped into the chief historian's office at NASA, I also found that the SHFG was the same welcoming and supportive organization that I had come to know over a decade earlier. Clearly, Roger Trask's positive influence lived and lives on here in this association. Now, our annual meeting topic this year, Rethinking Methods and Approaches in the Wake of the Pandemic, is an important topic, but unfortunately, I'm afraid that I'm not particularly well qualified to address the pandemic part of that because, as you heard, I retired from NASA in the summer of 2020, just 5 months into the COVID crisis. And while I may have little insight into how your lives and work have been impacted this last 3 years, perhaps I can touch on how we faced some of the challenges during the 2010s at NASA history. And hopefully there are some methods and approaches in that story that you might find of use as we leave this annual meeting and get back to the regular work of federal history and our jobs. Now, let me begin by acknowledging that not all federal history programs are created equal. NASA's history program has been particularly blessed in its 60-plus years. The primary government organization that NASA was built on, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the NACA, didn't have a history program at all. However, NASA's first administrator, T. Keith Glennon, was quick to establish one. Now, Glennon came to NASA in 1958 from the presidency of Case Institute of Technology. And Melvin Kranzberg, a name I suspect is familiar for some of you, was one of the leading proponents of the history of technology, and he was a professor at Case at the time. Legend has it that Dr. Kranzberg buttonholed Glennon and convinced him that NASA would likely be making a lot of history and that a well-managed history program could help NASA achieve its ambitious goals. Professor Kranzberg was apparently pretty convincing because within a year, Administrator Glennon had hired a chief historian and the history program got off to a great start under Gene Emmy. Now, Gene started work in November 1959, and the initial charter of the history program was issued on July 19, 1960 as NASA Circular Number 88. At just 2 pages long, Circular Number 88 assigned 3 tasks to the history program: preparing official histories, establishing guidelines for document collections, and outreach to government, professional academic organizations, and individuals. And although many functions and projects have been added to that list over the decades, it seems like a pretty tidy summary of the underlying focus of NASA's history program throughout the years. The success of NASA, especially in its first decade, has been another significant advantage for the history program at NASA. While the early efforts of NASA's history program have been faulted by some for being too focused on those successes, particularly in the human spaceflight program, and also too focused on the technology rather than the people, there was certainly no shortage of work for the history program to do, and a keen interest both within the agency itself and in the public to read that work. The old saw about success breeding success certainly applies here. Winning the race to the moon, and there really was a race to the moon, but that's a story for another day, made it easy to attract brilliant and energetic people to work at NASA and with the history program. And this included the authors who wrote the majority, the contract authors who wrote the majority of NASA's history publications. But it also applied to many others, from graduate student assistants to interns to NASA history fellows, many of whom have gone on to long and distinguished careers. Now, the level of public enthusiasm for NASA is remarkable. Sure, you will find people wearing T-shirts with the logos of the various military branches of service, and on the assorted gift trailers outside here in the mall, I've seen FBI and CIA T-shirts, although not today. But NASA seems to be in a federal agency brand category of its own, as you can see if you walk around in the gift store right upstairs. In fact, when I moved back to Massachusetts 3 years ago, even I was surprised to find multiple racks of NASA logo wear in the local Target store. Last week, Senator and former astronaut Mark Kelly said that NASA is, quote, the Dolly Parton of government agencies. Everybody loves Dolly Parton. Now, this sort of adulation can be problematic for us historians, but NASA and its history program have benefited tremendously from it. While you may not enjoy the same level of public interest and commitment at your agency, let me urge you to consider the advantages of making more use of volunteers, a theme I've heard throughout the last 2 days here. There are things that you do that are inherently governmental and that aren't suitable for volunteer work. However, I'm pretty sure that most of you feel that your history and archival efforts are not overstaffed at the moment. As for the NASA history program, it's actually probably smaller than you think it was. At the headquarters over the last couple of decades, the program has been authorized about 5 civil servant positions, it's kind of bobbled around there, and 3 to 4 contractors who do most of the work in the office. Due to budget and HR issues, some of these slots went vacant for considerable periods of time. And there were several points during the 2010s when we were down to about half-level staffing, about 5 people in the office. I'll also note here that despite knowing my plans to retire several months in advance, NASA didn't get around to appointing a replacement for 2.5 years. Now, they did a good job. Brian Odom's a great seventh chief historian at NASA, and so that's a great thing. But sadly, this is pretty typical. Filling support positions was simply not a priority, and the process of doing so, particularly during the era of sequestration in the 20-teens, was slow, convoluted, and easily thrown off track by budget cuts. Now, beyond the Beltway, there are also NASA historians and archivists that work at some of NASA's 10 field centers around the country. But until very recently, those folks worked with various local organizations at their center, and coordination with the History Office at headquarters was largely informal. In addition, the staffing levels at those centers was highly variable. For example, at Johnson Space Center, the home of NASA's oral history experts, they had a fairly robust staff with a civil servant archivist and 2 to 3 contract historians. But in my decade as chief historian, Johnson's history program faced at least 2 separate and serious threats of elimination due to budget problems. Most of the rest of NASA's field centers had either an archivist or a historian, and in some cases, those positions were part-time additional duty jobs. And one of NASA's centers, including NASA's oldest center, you would think would have a history program, had no history office or archival program at all. Fortunately, that's being rectified these days. My point here, though, is not to complain about budget and staffing, but to emphasize that for all the success of NASA's history program, it has faced shortfalls and budget problems not unlike those that you probably face as well. But my 5 predecessors as chief historian dealt with those staffing and budget challenges in part by cleverly and energetically embracing the use of volunteers. And this required substantial investments of their time and energy in creating and administrating things like graduate student projects, internships, and public-produced web content. Our very first chief historian, Gene Emmy, began using graduate student assistants in the 1960s. One of the most notable of those was John Logsdon, who later went on to found the Space Policy Institute at the George Washington University and has had a long, productive, and very distinguished career. His work with the NASA History Office is one of many investments in volunteer work that has paid huge dividends. Several decades later, when Roger Lanius was serving as NASA's 4th chief historian, and the internet was a new thing back in those ancient days, he saw the tremendous potential of putting NASA's history online. And he had plenty of material to put online in the form of dozens of NASA history books. But there was no easy way to take printed books and put them online. Out of this need arose a small army of volunteers who converted the print books into lengthy HTML pages that sort of strung together. This work, of course, required the investment of considerable time in managing the volunteers and coordinating with NASA's IT staff, but it proved its worth in the end. Now, once space enthusiasts in the public got involved in building the history.nasa.gov website, the process seemed to gain a momentum of its own. One of the groups of enthusiastic volunteers, a group led by a guy named Eric Jones, decided to create a set of annotated versions of the official transcripts of the communication between the Apollo astronauts who were working on the moon and mission control in Houston. As this project grew into so much more than just transcripts, the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal, as it became known, turned into a huge web-based catalog of materials in need of some big servers, which were expensive back in the 90s. And NASA History Office agreed to host it because NASA didn't notice how expensive those servers were because they were spending so much money on other servers. Right. Just a couple of years later, a fellow in Scotland by the name of David Woods thought that this annotated transcript idea could be extended to cover the rest of the parts of the Apollo missions that weren't covered by the Lunar Surface Journal. In other words, the whole rest of the 11 Apollo flights with crews on board. Thus was born the Apollo Flight Journal, another project that eventually turned into a large international team of volunteers whose work is, again, done by them but hosted online by NASA. My predecessors at NASA were also incredibly creative in partnering with other organizations to advance a variety of pretty ambitious objectives. For example, NASA's 3rd chief historian, Sylvia Fries, negotiated an agreement with the American Historical Association to create the Fellowship in Aerospace History. Under this agreement, the History Office would fund the fellowship every year, and the AHA would provide all the administrative support needed to operate the fellowship that was aimed at providing support to largely graduate students who were pursuing scholarly research in aerospace history. 37 NASA AHA aerospace fellowships have been awarded to students since the late 1980s. And while I certainly don't intend to claim that a $20,000 fellowship can alter the course of history, it has proved to be a wise investment in the careers of many people who have had a significant impact on the field. like, for example, Margaret Whitekamp, the chair of the Space History Department at the National Air and Space Museum now, or Asif Siddiqui, a professor at Fordham University, who is the leading Western scholar on Soviet and Russian space history. This fellowship was such a good idea that NASA's fifth chief historian, Steve Dick, expanded the program to offer similar fellowships through the Society for the History of Technology and the History of Science Society. With 3 fellowships each year, NASA has been able to encourage and, I think, improve the study of air and space history with little more effort than doing the paperwork needed to transfer the funds. Well, there's also the issue of the time I had to spend defending those fellowships during the last decade, but again, that's another story we'll leave for another day. But my point in recounting the exploits of my predecessors is not simply to rehash some interesting points of history, but to point out that the tradition of creative and even ambitious leadership had been well established before I had arrived on the scene in 2010. And as I've noted elsewhere, my initial goal for the NASA history program was not to mess up the great program that I inherited that had been built by my 5 predecessors. The history office at headquarters was small, but a very productive team. And I saw my primary function as making their jobs easier, making some improvements around the margins, and maybe doing some historical research and writing of my own. Well, those of you who have been in this business since 2010 will remember that things got very interesting for civil servants in the next 10 years. The continuing failure of our political leaders to pass the federal budget in a timely fashion plays havoc with implementing any program, but the implementation of sequestration, those mandatory across-the-board reductions in federal agency budgets in 2013 and 2014, had deadly impacts. In an engineering-focused agency like NASA, the effects were disproportionate on support functions like history. And while the budgetary crisis eased somewhat later in that decade, the election of 2016 brought with it elected officials and political appointees openly hostile to federal employees. In a time when alternative facts were a favorite political weapon, the keepers of the actual facts, records managers, archivists, historians, frequently found themselves persona non grata here in Washington, D.C. In that kind of climate, I drew inspiration from my predecessors' incredible creativity. And also, while it dawned on me that improvements around the margins, and especially doing historical research and writing on my own, were luxuries that I simply couldn't afford. In retrospect, it's now very clear to me that my priority had to be preserving and promoting the history program. At the time, though, it felt like I was stumbling along from one crisis to another, although it was clear even then that what we were doing as federal historians is important work. So, in the spirit of rethinking methods and approaches in federal history, let me touch on a couple of the challenges that the NASA history program faced during my decade at the helm and how we found our way through them. And I'll start with a revolution in publishing. Now, we all know that PDF files are practically the standard way now that federal agencies publish anything now, including history books. But in 2010, NASA history was still accustomed to a print run of 4,000 to 5,000 or even more of each of the 4 to 5 books that we issued each year. Fortunately for us, the forward-thinking folks in NASA's printing and design office were already creating ebook and PDF versions of everything that they did for us for a couple of years before that. Now, I'm a big fan of print books, right? And I was wary of depending on electronic formats, especially since I found myself at the time unable to open the files from my dissertation that I had done in Microsoft Word 1.0 and stored on floppy disks just a decade before. But then, in a not very well thought out application of cost center management principles, the NASA headquarters central printing budget was slashed into ribbons, with the expectation that organizations that needed something so outdated as printing services would simply pay for them out of their own budget. Unfortunately, this didn't account for the fact that the relatively tiny history budget had always been based on a number of other services like printing that were being provided by other parts of the headquarters support budget. Absorbing this cost would have consumed half of our history budget. So we slashed print runs to the minimum that made economic sense, which, by the way, at least in our experience, was about 2,000 copies. Below that number, the per copy price gets really outrageous. We deferred a number of releases of books that we were planning, and I got out my tin cup and went around to various NASA officials who might be interested in a particular book and asked them to cover the printing costs. Surprisingly, the tin cup approach was pretty effective, in part because, like me, the people I approached wanted a paper copy of the book to read, and the kinds of money I was asking them for was a mere pittance to them, a rounding error in their budget. Another surprise to me, though it wasn't to my colleagues in the NASA Printing and Design Office who were thinking ahead about this stuff, is that the free availability of our books in PDF and the 2 major ebook formats proved to be very popular. Downloads from the NASA ebook site numbered in the tens of thousands for most of our books. And while I thought that the cuts to the printing budget were going to end our history program and the history book production program, the actual upshot was that now many, many more people have an opportunity to read these NASA history books and monographs for free without having to track down one of the couple thousand printed copies. And now at that point, when all new NASA history books were available for download, we realized that our back catalog, that same one that I mentioned had been recreated in HTML by volunteers tediously typing things in the 1990s, that was no longer suited to people who were accessing the internet on their tablet and phones. Those HTML pages didn't read very well there. And there were no electronic files for us to upload, even for books that had been published as recently as 2007. Those printing files had vanished. The one thing we did have were duplicate hard copies of most of those books, and we had a fair amount of staff time since our travel budget had been zeroed out. Much as it pains me to admit this as a lover of books, we put one of our interns to work disassembling print books and scanning them to create high-res PDFs of our entire back catalog and a number of other NASA publications that were created outside the history program, but that are of historical interest. As that project progressed, we actually came up with some end-of-year funds that we used to hire that intern back. His name's Andres Alameda, and we hired him back as a contractor to finish off that job for us. So our website was still stuck in the 1990s, and because of the funding for modernizing it had disappeared during sequestration, it was going to stay there for a while, and that's a whole other story about our website that Robin Rogers, who some of you have met here at the meeting today in the last 2 days, may have met. She's the key to solving that problem. But our website was going to stay stuck in the 1990s for a while, but at least at that point, in the mid-2010s, our full catalog of books was accessible online in at least PDF format. Now, throughout the 2010s, people fascinated with NASA history continued to surprise me with things that they came up with. In one particular case, a Canadian by the name of Ben Feist contacted us about a project that he had done for fun in his spare time. Now, Ben works in IT, or worked in IT in Ottawa, so his idea of what's fun in his spare time may be different than yours. But he was a fan of the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal and the Apollo Flight Journals, but he thought that the text presentation could be much improved with some multimedia integration, and that was sort of his day job, was doing multimedia websites. So for the 45th anniversary of Apollo 17, he created Apollo 17 in real time. It was a really very intuitive web portal that fused transcripts, audio recordings, digitized film and pictures, plus assorted science and background information all together, and it would effectively play back the entire Apollo 17 mission from launch to landing in real time over the course of the anniversary of that mission. It could also be used to access at any time to look at various parts of the mission and drill in deep to find things. And you could scroll around and find whatever you wanted. Now, Ben contacted us because he was hoping that NASA History could provide some support to improve the site and expand it to other Apollo missions. It occurred to me, and it was clear to me, that this was a powerful new tool for telling the story of Apollo to a new generation, and I was really excited. And with the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission coming up, I saw this as a golden opportunity for NASA. Sadly, my supervisor in the Office of Communications just didn't see it. He was dealing with his own budget crisis, and at that point, the Apollo 11 anniversary was still a couple years in the future. So this total focus on the daily news cycle and the belief that they can spin anything at the last minute is one of the many reasons why your history office should never be controlled by the Public Affairs or Communications Office, and why that's one of the practices recommended in the SHFG guidelines, in fact. Well, meanwhile, Ben assembled his own international team of volunteers, people all across the world, to build out Apollo in real time. And it became a sensation with the public just in time for the Apollo 11 anniversary. It also became a bit of a sensation within NASA. And folks working on plans for the Artemis missions back to the moon were wowed by Ben's design and saw its potential for use in actual real time for handling the huge streams of electronic data that will be coming back to Earth when we return to the moon later this decade. And what strikes me as poetic justice, Ben and some of the Apollo in real time team now have jobs at Johnson Space Center working on just that project. There's one other aspect of the work of the NASA History Office in the 2010s that I'd like to touch on today, and this will take a little while, so sorry for that. And that's our involvement in the movies. While we had tremendous success in the collaboration on the 2017 movie Hidden Figures and the 2019 IMAX documentary Apollo 11, I found that even successful movie collaborations can be problematic, and not just in the ways that you might expect. When a federal agency works with movie makers, it has really very little leverage over the project once it agrees to help. Fortunately for NASA, we have a very experienced and savvy movie liaison in the person of Bert Ulrich, but even that hasn't prevented friction with some movie makers, especially those working on feature films. After all, you have to remember movies, even documentaries, are not made for purely altruistic historical storytelling purposes. They're there to make money. Right? And to do that, they have to be entertaining enough and short enough to get people to part with their hard-earned cash to view them. So even documentaries are likely to simplify historical facts and add at least some things designed to be entertaining to an audience, things that professional historians have been trained not to do. Careful review of a script is critical, but movie scripts will change dozens of times in the course of filming, and the filming usually happens after you've agreed to collaborate with the producers on the movie in the first place. In my limited experience, the only reliable indicator of a happy film collaboration is whether the filmmakers are open to honest dialogue and respect your judgment as a historical expert. But that can be a pretty difficult thing to figure out, particularly when you're getting a hard sell from some Hollywood type. Fortunately, I got lucky on my first feature film that I was involved with, Hidden Figures. Director Ted Melfi, he was a truly curious and open person, and he was fanatical about getting the historical details as correct as he could. But he's also a brilliant filmmaker, and he knows what an audience will enjoy. So he and I had lots of respectful disagreements, I'll call them, about things like whether an employee was really likely to wander into a wind tunnel in high heels and find herself in mortal danger. But these discussions, actually, it turns out people love that scene like Ted said they would. Oh well. But those discussions prepared me to respond to lots of questions of fact when the movie was actually released later on. For example, did Katherine Johnson actually have to run to other buildings to use the colored restroom? The answer, no. She didn't, but other African-American computers did. So it's true, but not true in her particular case. Did Al Harrison, played by Kevin Costner in the movie, if you remember that, did he really take a crowbar to the colored restroom sign and tear it down? No. Al Harrison was a character that was made up for the movie. And segregated facilities at Langham Research Center had been quietly integrated by 1958, and there were no more colored restroom signs or colored dining rooms or any other things that there had been in the 40s and 50s at Langley. And moreover, despite the uplifting conclusion to the movie, gender and racial discrimination at NASA did not instantly end in early 1962. But the close and collegial partnership on Hidden Figures left me and my many NASA colleagues who also work on this well prepared to deal with the very intense media and public interest in the film. Despite all that, I really was stunned by an email I got from a guy named Rick Booth about 8 months after the film came out. Now, Rick was the resident historian at the John and Annie Glenn Museum in New Concord, Ohio. The museum is based in John Glenn's childhood home. The museum's displays pointed out correctly that Glenn's Mercury mission flew the intended 3 orbits before splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. However, Rick found himself under significant pressure to change the displays because they didn't jibe with the movie Hidden Figures. In the movie, Glenn's mission appears to be planned for 7 orbits around the Earth, but it's cut short after 3 orbits because of a problem with the heat shield. After getting Rick's note, I went and dug out my multiple versions, and there were like 25 of them, of this Hidden Figures script that I had, and found the early version where I noted, among dozens of other observations, that Glenn's mission was actually planned for only 3 orbits. I also found the email where the script writers responded to that and said that the audio transcript from the mission clearly shows that Glenn was told shortly after launch that he was go for at least 7 orbits. And as I said, they were pretty fanatical about getting the details right, so they were busy reading transcripts. They also noted that the early termination of the mission had also been depicted in the 1983 movie, The Right Stuff, so it must be true. If I'd taken the time at that point to dig up contemporary news reports, which clearly pointed out that the mission was planned for 3 orbits, I could have proven that The Right Stuff was wrong about history again. The plan was only for 3 orbits, and that transmission to astronaut Glenn was a way of telling him that his insertion into orbit was so accurate that he could have made 7 orbits if he had to. Unfortunately, I get busy with other questions about the script, and this error sort of slipped through, and I forgot about it, and it was in the final film. Little did I imagine that this would lead to disputes about museum displays. But the simple fact of the matter is that many more people will see a feature film than will ever read a book about space history. So the movie version becomes history. And this is one of the significant risks for us in working with feature or even documentary filmmakers. The agency's participation is often seen as a blanket endorsement that the movie is the truth in large ways and small. Even the most carefully made films about historical events can warp perceptions in some troubling ways. Take, for example, the most historically accurate of all the films about the Apollo era, the 1995 film Apollo 13. Most of you guys have probably seen that, right? This film has a well-deserved reputation for historical accuracy, so much so that among NASA employees, it's a little bit of a competition to see if we can find things that the movie got wrong. Yet, even the tagline for the movie, you remember what the tagline for the movie is, Apollo 13? Not usually we have a problem, but the other one, failure is not an option. Failure is not an option, right? That line was made up for the movie. I've heard legendary flight director Gene Kranz admit that the line is so good that he wished he had said it. But the first time that those words were uttered about Apollo 13 was in the movie. And now it is permanently associated with it on mugs, hats, t-shirts, and even the title of Gene Kranz's autobiography. Recently, a more troubling corruption of the historical record regarding the movie Apollo 13 has come to light. The folks behind Apollo in Real Time, Ben Feist and his collaborators, are adding 20-odd channels of the internal mission control audio to their coverage of the missions in the real-time sites, Apollo real-time sites. Now you can listen to every word on the communication loops, as they were called in NASA, during the missions. And this includes a lot of technical details that the people at the various mission control positions and stations there in Houston were discussing with each other. But it also includes chats about sports, jokes, calls from the spouse requesting that someone pick up a quart of milk and bring it home, and even, in at least one case, a male engineer trying to ask a female coworker out for a date. Spoiler alert, she turns him down. In comparing things on the audio record to what people who participated in the events now say, it's clear that things depicted in the movie have overwritten some people's memories of what actually happened. This is evident in many ways, but is perhaps most notable in the nail-biting final movie scene where minutes of communication blackout tick slowly by with no indication whatsoever that the capsule had survived reentry until suddenly the parachute opening appears on live TV. Well, the more complicated reality is that mission control staff got positive indication that the capsule survived, and they were in touch with the crew just about 90 seconds later than they might have otherwise expected, as if that's not nail-biting enough. Yet some people who worked in mission control now recount those events exactly as they appear in the film. So the film can become reality not just for casual viewers, but also for what we might consider to be reliable witnesses. This should give us all pause, and if you ever do have an opportunity to work on a film project, it should encourage you to be very attentive to the details, more so than me. Details and reality matter. And that means that what we do matters. Every member of the society, archivists, historians, editors, curators, administrative staff, and all those other people whose specialties contribute to federal history programs, play a critical role in making our society work. Our Constitution, that marvelous document on display right upstairs, right? The one that you and I are probably all sworn to uphold and defend, right? Only works when our citizenry knows the truth about how our government works and why and how it doesn't work. We are a critical link in the chain that allows law and policy to be based on actual fact, not alternative facts. I commend your reading a book by Richard Ovenden. He's the director of the Bodleian, the main library at the University of Oxford, entitled Burning the Books, A History of the Deliberate Destruction of Knowledge. Ovenden's book, it's a bit quirky in places, and focuses mainly on archives and libraries, because of course he's a librarian, rather than history programs, but it's a sobering and useful read. The good news for those of you who, like me, have a much too tall pile of books that we want to read, is that he summarizes his thesis in a very nice, concise final chapter that's subtitled, Why We Will Always Need Libraries and Archives, which I think you should hand out to anybody that's your boss. In it, he makes a clear and compelling case that libraries, archives, and clearly history programs are vital to free societies. So the next time your supervisor suggests that your agency needs to replace the air conditioners or the computers more than it needs a history program, as happened at Johnson Space Center, you might note that, among other things, your agency's history program, to paraphrase Ovenden, provides a fixed reference point, allowing truth and falsehood to be judged through transparency, verification, citation, and reproducibility. Such things are as important to our republic as the air we breathe and the tools we use to do our work. So, I urge you all to continue to do excellent work and do not be afraid to stand up for that work and to fight for a robust history program in every federal agency. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon to honor all of our great awardees and to hear that great and inspiring lecture. Thank you, Bill. And so this will conclude our program. So thanks again, and I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you can join us at the reception to follow. Thank you.